I want to welcome our special guest, Jerry Robinson. He's an economist and entrepreneur and best-selling author of the book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation. After we saw Obama on Tuesday night and we realized that he's not going to cut spending, I want to talk about how much time we have left, and we're going to look at the 4 stages of money and why every government that has borrowed as much as Obama has ends up with hyperinflation. Mr. Jerry Robinson, pleasure. How are you, sir?
Great to be here, Andy. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. So, Jerry, let's start in your book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation. I want to talk about the life cycles of democracies. And if we look at history, this is pretty common. And walk us through the 4 different stages of money, how money starts, how money ends. Let's just start there. Give us the 4 stages.
Well, the 4 stages of money are pretty basic. It begins with commodity money. Anytime a group of people get together and they have a civilization of any kind, they look for something to use for money. I mean, it can be paper, it can be rocks, it can be shells. Historically, people have used gold and silver. They've even used livestock. But the reason that gold and silver were so preferred is because they were often easily divisible, and they could hold their value, and they were small and compact as opposed to a big cow. You know, how are you going to divide that thing up? So,
right.
In other words, commodity money. This is money that actually has intrinsic value. There's worth to it. You can either eat it, or you can use it for some other purpose, or you can spend it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the very first form. The second form is receipt money. Eventually, as the civilization grows, Andy, you got to put this stuff somewhere. There's just too much of it, mm-hmm. and it needs to be safe. And so this gave rise to the goldsmiths, and of course they would have kind of the early form of banking. And so they would hold the gold, and they would issue receipts, and these receipts were as good as gold. They were basically cash. Eventually, the government steps in, because you know just as well as anybody else knows that government is never content until they're regulating something. Mm-hmm. So they come in and they regulate the receipt money, because certainly it can't be good unless they're involved in it. And so they begin to issue what is known as a fiat currency. No longer is the currency backed up by a commodity, but instead it's backed up by the full faith and credit of that particular government. Mm-hmm. When that occurs, that switch is called a move towards a fiat currency. It's issued by decree or issued by fiat. Finally, every single fiat currency ends the same way. History tells us that they all end in hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is simply the destruction of the purchasing power of the currency through the overproduction of the currency.
Mm-hmm. And inflation, it's interesting. People always equate inflation, especially in the mainstream media, with higher prices for consumer goods, when in fact the real definition, correct me if I'm wrong here, inflation is an oversupply of money. It's an overprinting of money. And then, of course, one day the prices will catch up with that overprinting. But walk us through those 2 distinctions.
Well, it's a very important distinction because, again, it all depends who you blame. I mean, the government loves to blame inflation as price increases, because then they can point at those greedy merchants and those greedy corporations that just won't stop raising
right,
prices.
And you see that, by the way, in Venezuela or, Castro in Cuba, and they say, oh, it's these greedy capitalists and these greedy convenience store owners. They want to raise the price of bread on you, right?
They issue price controls,
right,
and to try to control their own inflation. But the truth of the matter is, money, when the supply of money is increased, when you inject, like the Federal Reserve right now is injecting $3 billion per day, when you inject that much money into the economy on a daily basis, you are creating inflation. So the symptom is not the same thing as the actual disease. The root of the problem is the printing of money. The result of it is higher prices.
Right, and we're going to get to that because people are wondering now, okay, so they're printing, but when does hyperinflation actually come? Is that 6 months from now, 6 years from now? Before we answer that question, though, I want to talk about the year 1971, what was special that year with Richard Nixon, and then walk us through 1970s petrodollars, because this all has a history of the beginning of what we're experiencing now. But walk us through 1971.
Yeah, Andy, this is a really fascinating thing, and we'll go through this really quickly. But in the late 60s, the Bretton Woods system that was founded in 1944 began breaking down. This exchange rate that was fixed with the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold. It was backed up by gold, and other currencies could be exchanged into dollars and then gold. So in other words, the dollar was kind of the king of the currencies. Mm-hmm. And in the late 60s, LBJ was spending a lot of money. Nixon was spending a lot of money. The wars, the war on poverty, Vietnam War, in essence, what happened, the countries around the world began to lose faith in the dollar. They began to redeem their currencies for gold. They didn't want to hold dollars anymore. So by 1971, August 15th, Mr. Nixon came on and interrupted the Bonanza show and said, look, we got to cut the ties to gold. Well, immediately this caused a problem. Nations were shocked. Some weren't, but most were. And the nation was shocked. It was a very new era to be in. This created a lack of artificial demand for the dollar. And this is what many people don't realize is the underpinnings of our current crisis. We must maintain an artificial demand for our dollars because that provides us with a permission slip to continue to print more. If you lose the permission slip to print more, then you're in a massive problem. Nixon knew this, and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, knew this. They formulated something called the petrodollar system. They went to Saudi Arabia, a very brilliant plan. They basically said, look, we'll give you weapons, we'll give you military support, we'll protect your oil fields. All we want from you is when you price your oil out of the ground, price it in U.S. dollars. Well, the Saudis said no problem. Pretty soon all of OPEC said, we want that same deal. We want weapons. We want protection. We want you to come in and help us. So OPEC was all in by 1975. This created an immense artificial demand for U.S. dollars. People living in Japan, for example, they're very resource poor there. So they had to take their yen, convert it into dollars just to get oil. So this was a major coup and score for the United States government.
Right, that's a smart move. Basically, we said, hey, if you need to buy oil, and we know that everybody's a consumer of oil, you have to buy it in U.S. dollars, which makes the U.S. dollar valuable just by the basis of it. Okay.
Yeah, and so by September of 2000, this really began breaking down. Saddam Hussein was the very first one who said, look, here's the euro. Let's try a new currency. We're tired of these U.S. Guys. We're tired of the U.S. dollar. Let's move to the euro. And, you know, of course, we know what happened with him. Iran did the same thing. Libya tried the same thing. North Korea did the same thing. Venezuela did the same thing. Axis of evil is really what we're talking about. But in 2009, the really big enchilada came out when China and Russia both began to say, look, we no longer want to continue to use the dollar because it's falling in purchasing power, and we're basically being held at gunpoint to use it for all of our oil transactions. So they wanted out. The UN and other nations as well began saying, let's move to a different currency. Let's use a basket of currencies. The U.S. is fighting this, and they're still fighting this to this day. But what we're seeing is the lack of faith in the dollar is causing many nations to use other types of currencies, and especially gold. Gold has been a major beneficiary of all of this.
Well, Jerry, I got to ask. So let's get to the point now. We catch up to the future where we're at. And if we could responsibly spend money and we had deficits that were under control and we could finance those deficits at low interest rates, you know, we'd be okay going into the future. But we see Obama, $1.3 trillion every single year. You know, when he walks into office, there's $10 trillion in total debt. Now it's $16.5 trillion. When he's done, it could be $22 trillion. It could be larger than the size of our entire economy. So you know the history here. What is your gut feeling as to when this could all break loose, hyperinflation could break out? Because when things go bad, as we've learned in Greece, they can go bad quickly. So does your gut tell you that we have a year left, or can we outlast Obama and turn the ship around, you know, before the iceberg hits? What do you think?
There's a lot of concern, again, back to China and Russia, because they have been making a lot of saber-rattling with their currencies. There's a big, massive currency war going on right now, and a lot of things that aren't being reported in the mainstream press that are telling us that we're getting closer to this kind of breakdown. The problem here is we probably have somewhere in the vicinity, I would say, on the short end of about 12 months, I would say all the way out to perhaps 5-10 years. And the reason is because this reserve currency is everywhere. People use it everywhere. And so it will take some time for people to begin moving to something else. Mm-hmm. The problem is, Andy, for your listeners and for me and for you, is that when that demand, that artificial demand evaporates for the dollar, we no longer get to print money to pay off debt. We actually have to pay it out of our pockets.
Right. So immediately, if we can't borrow money and we borrow to finance about 40% of our budget, we have to take across-the-board haircut of 40% to balance our books because there's no more borrowing. The game is up. The game is over.
Yeah, basically taxes have to go up. There's $20 trillion sitting in IRAs and 401ks right now, and no doubt Obama is licking his chops thinking about the distribution tax he could slap on those.
But Jerry, what about this? And this may be counterintuitive, but the Chinese own $1.5 trillion of our debt, which is over 10% approximately. Aren't they going to be screwed when all of a sudden hyperinflation, it's money that they lent to us that now has little to no value. So in a way, I could see that they're incentivized to hurt us, but then they're only going to be shooting themselves in the foot because they backed us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why we've said this is going to be a slow, steady decrease in value. The Chinese are very smart. They know exactly what they're doing. They have been up and down as far as empire many more times than any other nation existing right now. They are friends of empire. They have been empires over and over. So they are mounting their next empire. I mean, this is what they're doing right now. We're watching it happen right before our eyes.
Okay, now, Jerry, sorry to interrupt, but I got to ask this question. We only have a minute or two left, and I want to get it out. So what is the thinking in the mind of the president? And that, I guess it's like looking at housing prices in 2005, and that everybody believed at a time that they could just go up. They can only go up. So Obama, maybe in his brain, thinks, hey, we can keep borrowing. We've always borrowed, and America's a strong place, and it's never going to come back to bite us. But historically, no government throughout history has ever been able to get away with that. Why does he think that we're different?
Well, there's a type of mentality that infects Wall Street and it infects Washington, and that is the present is the minimum. He doesn't have a choice. We live in a debt-based monetary system. Therefore, the debt-based monetary system requires more debt. Therefore, he has to move this way. There is no other choice. Now,
yeah, but Jerry, is that true, though? Couldn't he say, look, let's get responsible about this and reform social entitlements, which is 70% of our budget, and then over time we can work this out, get in a room and figure this out with Republicans? But the last couple speeches, the inauguration speech and the State of the Union speech, it's like his attitude is F you, I'm doing it my way.
You're definitely right. Responsibility is certainly something that needs to happen, but the overall debt itself, this present is the minimum mentality, is required in our current debt-based monetary system. It's a terrible, unfortunate side effect of having a fiat currency. In the book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation, we lay out 21 income streams that people can create both now and in retirement. We lay out how to invest in precious metals, agriculture, commodities, energy. We provide solutions in this book, but I tell you, we really need solutions because the problems are immense.
All right. Well, Jerry, I hate to do this, but I got to jump, brother. Interesting stuff. And I always like to hear the 4 stages of money, because it's broken down into how governments, why they develop money, why they're originally backed by something to get people to buy into the system. And then once everybody's in the system and caught up in it, then they take away what they backed it with, which is either gold or silver or cows. And then it's money by fiat, which means money by decree. The government just declares its worth and everybody accepts it based on confidence. But then if the government acts recklessly, there goes the confidence. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And the question is it 6 months or 6 years? And that's the ultimate question. If we knew the answer, then we could just retire. All right, Jerry, I hate to do this. We got to jump. Jerry Robinson, Bankruptcy of Our Nation, best-selling author, entrepreneur, and economist. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, all the best, Jerry. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. My question to you is, when is the game up? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 years? Is it never? 877-927-ANDY. 877-927-2639. Also, coming up, we're going to lighten the mood in 12 minutes, our Valentine's Day special. We're going to talk about the business of online dating. 30 million Americans engage in it, and we're going to find out how much money's behind it, who's the fastest growing sector. We're going to get into all that. 877-927-ANDY. We're going to take a quick break. Remember the website, just Google Andy Dean. That's me, Andy Dean. It comes up first. Join us on Facebook. Say hello. We'll be right back.